So welcome everyone to our first session. My name is Jamie Taylor and I'm the CEO for the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission. And I'm pleased to be here today on the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation to kick off our first session. Today's session is sponsored by J.L. Richards, who had the pleasure of meeting last night. Thank you for your support of this exciting chamber event. So in this session, we will explore the findings of the Indigenous Economic Impact Analysis for the City of Thunder Bay, which was conducted by Indigenous and Community Engagement. The CDC initiated this study as part of the CDC's efforts towards economic reconciliation, but we didn't do this alone. We had a wonderful partnership with Fort William First Nation, Anishinaabe Business Professional Association, and Anishinaabe ASPE Development Fund. We are grateful for our partners, their knowledge, and commitment to this project that made it such a success. So now let's get the session started. Thunder Bay is a hub of Indigenous economic activity, and we set out to explore what this truly means, celebrating the stories, achievements, and impact behind it. Indigenous and Community Engagement, ICE, will share the results which highlights the substantial economic contributions of Indigenous people, communities, businesses, and governments to the Thunder Bay economy. By quantifying these impacts, the analysis provides valuable data that supports informed planning and decision-making for initiatives in business development, employment, education, and training. Once we've reviewed the study's key insights, we'll turn to our panelists to ignite discussion and share ideas to further support economic reconciliation, growth, and opportunity. So I'd like to introduce our presenter, Michael Fox. Michael is from Indigenous First Nation and is the President CEO of Indigenous Community Engagement, ICE, one of Canada's leading national Indigenous firms specializing in community consultation, facilitation, negotiations, capacity building, and social research, all of the things. He brings a wealth of experience in structuring projects and financing for both industry and Indigenous clients. He obtained an honors degree in political science with a focus on Aboriginal law and resource development, and has an MBA with a specialization in social enterprise. He is the co-chair of the Indigenous Affairs Committee for the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, and is the chair of the jury panel for the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program at the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business. He sits on the board of the Indigenous Resource Network, the Thunder Bay Community Economic Development Commission, and is a ministerial appointed board member for the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Good day. I'm from Indigenous First Nations. It's a small village on the Hudson Bay coastline. It's called Peawanik. It's a small community of, well, I grew up, it was 200, it's probably 300 now plus in the past 30 plus years since I lived there. Always good to be here. I just want to, first things first. First thing here is the First Nations, so I want to acknowledge my Indigenous brothers and sisters, Fort William First Nations, for being on their homelands, upon which I enjoy the beauty and the bounty and the blessings every day that I'm on it. So I just wanted to say that. So the background of the study, I'll just get right into it. It was initiated by the Thunder Bay Economic Development Commission in partnership with the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association and Fort William First Nations and Anishinaabe ASPE Development Fund. The report built an economic impact analysis for Metropolitan Thunder Bay. So what is that? Well, Metropolitan Thunder Bay includes the city of Thunder Bay proper, the municipalities of Oliver, Perpoonge, Nebing, the township of Shunya, Kami, O'Connor, and Gillies, and Fort William First Nations. Oh, am I supposed to turn this? Sorry. Multitasking. I'm sorry, guys. There you go. And Fort William First Nations. So the outline of the study today, what we'll share, is the Indigenous demographics of Thunder Bay, that will look at the Indigenous employment, the Indigenous businesses, the Indigenous services here in metropolitan Thunder Bay, and the Indigenous economic impact, the sum of the results, the total economic output, and some examples. And then we'll talk about how promoting Indigenous prosperity has worked in Thunder Bay. But before I move on, I just wanted to highlight any methodological questions. My resident crazy mad social scientist over there, James, he's our data scientist and economist at ICE. And so just the way we did it, we looked at other economic impact studies, Indigenous economic impact studies across Canada. We sort of deconstructed and reconstructed them with another economist firm out of BC called Big River Analytics. That's all they do, they're practicing economists. And what we wanted to do was formulate something very transparent and something defensible and repeatable. And so that in the future, say in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you want to repeat this process to demonstrate the growth of Indigenous prosperity, that can be done. With the way we did it. Previous ones, you know, academics and practitioners in this space, they don't like to share. We just want to show that everybody is making a difference in the Indigenous landscape here in Thunder Bay. So first is the Indigenous demographics in the labor force. So both mainstream and Indigenous here. Oh, sorry, that's not it. Oh, my pages are all screwed. All right. So the Indigenous demographics, all this, what we're showing here is that the shaded area represents the census. I'm going to say this right, that's why I'm looking at this. And plus, I think I need bifocals now. Okay, the shaded map represents the census subdivision population. I'll say that again. The shaded map here represents the census subdivision population that identifies as Indigenous. So this is from the 2001 census from Statistics Canada. So meaning the more darker the purple, the more people identify as Indigenous. So I think, you know, our general observations for us that travel around Northern Ontario, this is pretty obvious. You know, for many of us, the Indigenous population has grown and moved into centers all across Northern Ontario. That includes Thunder Bay. So in the pop-up screen here, right dead center, you can see very dark purple, that's Fort William First Nations. So obviously majority of them identifies as Indigenous. So that just gives you a sort of a high-level landscape, and more could be, and more is in the report for a breakdown. This is the Indigenous demographics of the labor force, both mainstream and Indigenous. So in Thunder Bay, 2021, there's 53,125 people in the labor force. In the Indigenous side, there's over 6,120, and there's a breakdown on both men and women. The only point there is that there's more Indigenous women in the labor force than Indigenous men, and it's kind of reversed in the mainstream on there. So, and you got the age breakdown of that. So that's the Indigenous demographics. So where are they? So in this report, we applied what's called the North American Industry Classification System, which is used to classify business and economic industries based on their primary economic activities. So we analyzed 20 industry, we performed 20 analysis on 20 industries in Thunder Bay. And for visual purposes, we kind of clustered them because it's just, you couldn't read the chart. In the report, you can read the chart based on each of the different industries or sectors, but we just clustered them here on the big numbers. So on the big numbers here, on the top, construction and manufacturing. On the Indigenous employment, there's over 661 persons. Public administrations, There's 664 persons, retail trade 680, science and information 300. I can't even read that one. Wholesale trade 60, very tiny one in the corner. And agriculture, mining 260 persons. Accommodation, foods, arts, and entertainment 670 persons. Healthcare and social assistance 1,320 persons. And then we clustered 5. And what are the clusters? Is utilities, transportation, warehouse, administration support, waste management services, and other services like charities. So in that cluster, there's 940. And education in the bottom there, I know you can't see it, but it's 445 persons. And in that tiny corner, doesn't mean it's not important, it's finance, insurance, and real estate, and there's 160 people, Indigenous people in that space in Thunder Bay that work in that sector. So if you wanted more detail on how unbundle this cluster we did, you can see that in the report. I think it's posted, it's gonna be posted. Yes, okay. So this is how the Indigenous labor force is distributed among the industries in Thunder Bay. The Indigenous businesses. So across metropolitan Thunder Bay, there are many Indigenous enterprises. Many are located within Fort William First Nations and throughout Thunder Bay as this representation. So the data source for that, we looked at Indigenous business registries. We looked at, I think NEDF has one, the federal government has one, and Canadian Council of Indigenous Business has one. So we scraped those things, or James did, I'm gonna say he did it. And then, and those that had addresses in Thunder Bay or Fort William, that's how we came up with the numbers on the Indigenous. And he did a visual representation, just distributing the businesses across metropolitan Thunder Bay. And a lot of these businesses, they're located here, but they're also servicing regional First Nations. So the primary market may not be Thunder Bay, they're actually servicing outside of metropolitan Thunder Bay. And it says so in their corporate profile. And what makes, I think the main takeaway on this picture is, and the data is that like Thunder Bay is an regional economic hub for Indigenous businesses and First Nations, because for a number of reasons. Thunder Bay, without a doubt, is a multimodal transportation center. It really is, and trying to move goods and services out of anywhere else, Thunder Bay is a natural thing for that, with the rail, with the airport, with the highways, and ports, even ports. And those that are shipping things, they know the challenge of logistics. And for someone that used to have to deal with logistics, especially up north, Thunder Bay and other townships help with that when it comes to Indigenous businesses. It also the case for the access for talent and skilled workers. You know, where if you're an Indigenous business within Thunder Bay or outside of Thunder Bay, we all are challenged in finding talent. and Thunder Bay, because of their cluster of institutions, educational and training institutions, it just becomes a natural point to find talent for your enterprises. And also for the Indigenous enterprises, and Brian probably knows this better than anyone else, is trying to find financial and professional services for your enterprise. Like, you know, to have a chartered accountant, very few in Red Lake, you know what I mean? There's very few in the smaller towns. There's probably less than nothing in First Nations, you know, when it comes to those type of remote First Nations I'm talking about, when it comes to those type of needed services as as a sole proprietor, it's pretty easy. I think we all started, a lot of us started as sole proprietors, but when you start getting employees and assets and facilities and real estate, that you actually need professional advice. And sometimes you can't find that in remote First Nations. You have to go to the service centers that have them, like Thunder Bay. Indigenous services. There's so much to say about this. There's so much Indigenous services in Thunder Bay. Even not just the Anishinaabe-Aski Nations Institutes, you know, the Anishinaabe-Aski, they got Anishinaabe-Aski Nation here, they got Anishinaabe-Aski Police Services, they got Anishinaabe-Aski Legal Services, they got their own institute, Oshki Windak Institute. That's just Anishinaabe-Aski, Treaty 9. Then you got sort of the organization, Indigenous Service Organization that started here, like Thunder Bay Housing, the Friendship Centers. I personally worked for the Ontario Native Women's Association in the 90s. They had 17 people when I was there, and I think I was the only man there for the 4 or the 5 years I worked there. And there was another man that came in, I feel so alone. But 17, they got over 200 today. 200 employees from 17 back in the day. And so these service organizations are an economic force. They actually contribute to the economy around that. So I won't get into the numbers. I mean, Delico is what, 600 plus? So there's a lot of Indigenous organizations that are contributing. The other trend line is that the surrounding First Nations, the federal government offered money to them to create off-reserve service offices. What does that mean? The band, the First Nations band, can actually create satellite offices in centers where most of their members are located. So for instance, like, I don't know, I think Rocky Bay is one of them that has an office here. If they think most of their off-reserve members are in Thunder Bay, there was money offered by the federal government to create satellite offices in Thunder Bay. So if you're observant in the last 10 years, you would have saw more First Nations offices in Thunder Bay opening up because of the trend line of the population growth, but also members moving to Thunder Bay for different reasons. Sometimes it's a push-pull factor. It could be housing, lack of housing, overcrowded housing, they have to come to Thunder Bay. Sometimes it's medical reasons. The older you get, the more ill you get, and the more often you have to go to hospitals and get medical attention. And as you get older, going back and forth and trying to find a medical escort to come to Thunder Bay, sometimes it's easier just to come to Thunder Bay and live here, you know, as an elder. And so there's different social trends, economic trends that happen to contribute to the Indigenous services here in Thunder Bay. The hard part of only having 20 minutes here, I can talk about every other organizations in town here. I don't want to leave anybody out. So the economic impact, you know, if you're not familiar with it, so I was a chairman of an aviation company. And as an aviation company, we would buy materials and goods for our hangar. We would buy materials and supplies for our planes. We would buy material and supplies for our customers, you know, and that all came from Thunder Bay, you know, if we were based here, or from the city that we were working in. And that would support the local businesses. So you would count, oh my God, is that Harold? I just talked about this guy last night, sorry. Talk about economic champion, there he is. So that's money, direct investment into the supporting businesses. Then you got to think about the money, not just for the staff of the Indigenous Aviation Company that spend money, but the staff within the businesses that support that aviation company. So it's a cycle, you know. So from Indigenous businesses purchasing from other Thunder Bay businesses, supporting household incomes. Their employees have employment and wages in Thunder Bay House. They buy retails from their spending habits in Thunder Bay, and then it creates additional demand. So it's a cycle. And when you trace the dollar, it cycles sometimes 3, 4, 5 times in the community. So what does that mean? So in economic terms, they talk about direct, indirect, induced spending. So the direct spending is all the input and expenses into production of the goods and services. So you know, all the employees, all the supports, all the, like, if you got trucks and vans, or if you got like all the things that make your operation viable. So that's direct spending. And you got indirect spending is the spending you did on in supporting, you know, buying the goods and services in the production of your goods and services. That's what they call indirect. The induced is the money that you support, not just your employees as Indigenous. I got 5 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay. I thought I was going to have enough time. Or okay, so let's get to the punchline here. And the induced is your employees. That has a real world impact in terms of your folks, both the Indigenous business and the non-Indigenous buying goods and services. And the total is the direct, indirect, and induced. There's another thing they use is simple, but we won't use that. We'll just use direct, indirect, induced, and total. And so this is it. This is the numbers. So the output is the direct is 742 million. The indirect is 202. The induced is 606. And we used multipliers that are standard in each of those sectors. What's funny is, I didn't know this until James told me, is that every industry actually has their own multiplier for direct and indirect. So hospitality is different from mining, it's different from forestry, it's different from aviation, and all the rest. So we follow the industry, because remember, we want this defensible and repeatable. And we used what's typically coded in the thing. So the total contribution of Indigenous businesses and organizations is actually $1.55 billion in Thunder Bay.
Wow.
It really is remarkable on that. So, and I think I moved here May 9th, 1990. I got off the Grey Goose bus from Timmins. Didn't know anybody. I just knew that I'm going to make it. That's what I said. I wanted to be a professional. I didn't know what it was going to be. I just said I was going to be a professional. It was not $1.55 billion. Fort William just built their first corporate building. And over that period of time, they got a corporate park now with an industrial subdivision. You got First Nations buying real estate and all that kind of stuff. There is on that. So how is that distributed among the industries? I won't go through this, but you know, education is 86 million a year. Public administration is 376 million a year. Construction, manufacturing, almost $250 million. Agricultural, mining, 76 million. Finance, industry, and research, 101 million. Healthcare is 198 million. Science and information, 73. Retail is 76, and wholesale and trades, 25 million. And the cluster industry is 234. In the total, that's how the economic output, the total outcome, is actually distributed among the industries in Thunder Bay, metropolitan Thunder Bay. Oh, I just wanted to give you an example as a oh, I did go way ahead here. It makes sense. So take Anishinaabe-Aski Development Fund, Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, which has chiefs meetings here. Typically it's 200 to 300 people that come to Thunder Bay. So I won't even use 300. I'll use 150 people that come to Thunder Bay for a chiefs meeting. Anybody got a calculator? You can verify this. 150 people, on average, $1,400 flight. Just remember, all the remote communities come right from all over. I just said on average, $1,400 flight return. 150 is $210,000 just for flights. Hotels, $150. I'm just going conservative. For 150 people, times 3 nights is $67,500. $67,500 for 150 rooms for 3 nights. Meals for 150 people, I just put $50. provincial rates. For 3 days, it's 22,500, right? So total is $300,000, one event. So when NAN has their meetings here, right, they're bringing in over 300,000. I'm going conservative, 150 people. $300,000, one event. So that's just an example. Oh yeah, so the total, you apply the multipliers. And this is what happens with the multipliers. I'll do one more. This education matters. Education actually contributes too. Indigenous education has an impact. So when you think of Thunder Bay, Confederation College, which I went to upgrading at Confederation College. I remember all my upgrading teachers, and I went to business, and I went to Lakehead University. Oshkosh didn't exist in 1990. They had NADC that spun out a native high school. Matawa has an education center, and Lakehead University. So I'll just stick with Lakehead. When I went to Lakehead, I think it was, Rachel's here, there was, I think 700, and the reason, because I was an advocate at Lakehead, and I wanted real numbers, like how many Indigenous students are here. The way you figure that out is the band sponsor students, because they have to mail, and you worked at NADC, Rachel, they mail the letter, the band sponsor letter to Lakehead, which is a verifiable document that says this is an Indigenous First Nation student. So we would have 700 Indigenous students in the 90s. Then the OSAP, right? We had a guess on the OSAP. Like my sister-in-law had OSAP, didn't get band funding. So we were trying to figure out how much Indigenous students are at OSAP. Right now, I think there's 1,000 on average at Lakehead. Hold that number, 1,000 Indigenous students just at Lakehead University today, right? And you probably pretty good recruitment campaign, maybe 300 a year to recycle every year. So you got the same 600, 700 going into the next year, next year. You got to recruit probably 300. So, a 4-year impact on Indigenous students in Thunder Bay: 24,000 in tuition, 21,000 in food, 40,000 in rent, and that's the impact using the multipliers. I won't go, just to make this easier and more intuitive. Just 1,000 students at Lakehead. I'm not going to add Confederation College, Oshkosh, the high school. 1,000. Just add 3 zeros to these amounts. That's Lakehead University's Indigenous students. So it's 158 million total output. 81 million in GDP, 33 million in wages that they support the Indigenous students that come here. Okay, last slide. Sorry, I know the wrap-up scene. Indigenous investments. It matters. You know, Brian Davey and others that support the ecosystem, the Indigenous ecosystem when it comes to economic development, they matter. They actually support. I sit on the board of the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund. I know what goes out to First Nations. I know where they're getting their supplies. And I know where they're getting their goods, their professional services. A lot of it from Thunder Bay. They matter. They're investing in hotels, housing, real estate, not just in Thunder Bay, all over Northern Ontario. I mean, I look at, again, the corporate park, that Fort William, and those of us old enough that used to go, they didn't have that. In fact, I remember Marvin Pelche telling me, like, it was pretty easy. 600,000 square feet, I think the Wasaya building was at 600,000 square feet. No, sorry, 6,000 square feet, $90 CapEx, O&M was 30, so it was $120 times 6,000 square feet was $720,000 to build that first building. And I think it was Wasaya was the one that went in. All they needed was an anchor tenant to put up the equity. And so someone put up, I think it was Wasaya, if I can remember, put up the equity. You say it was $250,000 of the 720, and RBC bankrolled it. Fort William didn't have to put up $1. after that. They had to pay back the down payment that was say at a negotiated interest rate. But that's how the demand for it. If you open up a building now, the demand, because the last building they built, we started that. Marvin and I and Darren, the one that it got so big, 27,000 square feet, got so complicated, and all the owners we just started it and we left. Just kidding. But it shows the demand of Indigenous business to be on reserve and the incentives to be tax-free. You have to be located on First Nations, on a First Nation to be tax-free. So the Indigenous partnership around resource development, whether that's in mining or energy, and you got an example of that in East-West Tie, as well as the Waasigan line today, the Indigenous education employment that we talked about, the Indigenous procurement, that's such a big deal right now across Canada, but it's the 5% of the federal government, but that's nothing compared to what corporate Canada's doing. I'll talk about it at some point. And then, of course, we talk about the Indigenous events. You think about all the Indigenous hockey tournaments, the blue ball tournaments, the volleyball tournaments, the baseball tournaments the Indigenous people have all seasons. Like, they matter. And they have teams coming in from all over the region every time we have one of those events. So I'll leave it there, and I'll get Jamie to come up and facilitate.
Thank you, Michael, for the insightful overview. If anyone has any questions, there'll be an opportunity to ask them following the panel discussion. We'll keep a couple minutes. So let's turn over to our panel. Joining us today is Cheryl St. James, the Economic Development Officer from Fort William First Nation. We have Brian Davey, the Executive Director of Anishinaabe Development Fund, and Jason Rasevich, who is the President of the Anishinaabe Business Professional Association. So thank you all for the partnership in getting this study done, and thank you for being here. Okay, so we're going to start off with the first question, and I'm going to ask this one of Cheryl. So Cheryl, why were you interested in participating in this study, and what is the importance of highlighting Indigenous impact in Thunder Bay?
Ani, everybody, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I was interested to participate in this study because I thought it was important for our communities, our First Nations, and for the city of Thunder Bay to know the impact that Indigenous businesses have on the economy of the metropolitan Thunder Bay. I think it's important that we did this study. It highlights the Indigenous impact on Thunder Bay. In the past, we've been marginalized in Canada's economy, which in turn is creating a false perception of us as beneficiaries of Canada and not contributors. Studies such as this point out this misinterpretation. It points to the potential of our businesses. It points to the unfolding process of our assertion of control over our economic futures. Indigenous economic power is about taking our place at the economic table, which in the past has been denied to us. The study can assist in creating strategic and relevant partnerships between Indigenous and mainstream businesses. It could increase access to capital, as it has shown us to be net contributors to the economy. It may increase the role of Indigenous procurement policies. With this knowledge, we can identify the goods and services that we provide, address poverty levels in the region. We can work toward creating inclusive pathways to training, capital, and support, ultimately breaking down systemic barriers. This effort will contribute to creating a healthier, more robust community for all of us.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for your partnership. The next question I have is for Brian. A lot of Indigenous organizations and governance bodies are establishing offices in Thunder Bay. Can you speak to the growth and the economic potential of these offices?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's a number of new buildings you're beginning to see, signs popping up here in Thunder Bay. These are offices, sub-offices of various communities, particularly in the remote north, where you have them looking now to the servicing off reserve people, particularly those ones that are living in Thunder Bay. So you're looking at education, health, other services that are important. But more importantly, from our standpoint at NEDF, of course, we'd like to see an economic aspect to the sub-office to see what we can do in support of their many economic initiatives they may have in the city. And we are in the process of trying to put together, well, we are putting together a larger fund to look at in support of these capital needs coming from the First Nations. And the sub-office plays a very vital role in the area of Thunder Bay, and we see more of those coming forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Speaking about Indigenous business, we'll carry on from that. I have a question for Jason. Can you speak to some of the challenges and opportunities for Indigenous business here in Thunder Bay?
Sure. It's impressive to see the numbers here on the study. So kudos to the ICE team and Michael Fox and all that was involved on the work. $1.5 billion. And when I think of looking further into the demographics, we've got the fastest growing population or demographic in Canada as far as Indigenous peoples. When we think of those numbers that are based off of some of the stats related to some of the census reports, there's been some recent numbers that have shown the population growth. So it's great to see that this report could be used as a baseline for not just evaluating and monitoring, where we go as far as projections over the next decade, but also considering how each organization that operates within the city could leverage that data for their own corporate strategies or for the city and the CDC for supporting some of the needs that are out there related to education, workforce development, and on the other level of procurement. We could talk about challenges all day and each year on some of the systemic issues that are discriminatory to Indigenous peoples to access capital. But I think the big opportunity here is on the procurement. And in the opening remarks, I acknowledge the ABPA board members that are here, Rachel, Brian, Stephen, but also acknowledging Jason Thompson, who's also made it to the conference today. And we've been strongly advocating on the procurement front. When we think of the gap that's there in the numbers, as far as you see employment and the gap with the population, that's a significant issue. We got to think of policy within organizations and how organizations are being held accountable on their people strategy, their DEI plans, and supporting recruitment internally and retention. On the Indigenous spend side, working in this area in the past, we've done for communities leaky bucket assessments to see dollars that communities spend and how those holes could be plugged to support a more integrated approach to supporting the Indigenous businesses. And I think that's an idea moving forward that we need to consider is when we see the economic impact and spend, how much of that is going towards the Indigenous businesses in the region and focusing out not just to the city, but the opportunities across Northwestern Ontario as well over the next period of time. We talk about reconciliation, we talk about holding companies accountable, and that's one of the key messages that we'd like to see moving forward from the ABPA is those that are benefiting from this spend of how they're supporting Indigenous businesses in their supply chain and opening up procurement policy to prioritize Indigenous participation plans within their corporate reporting. The other note on that I just wanted to end with is, when I see those numbers and think of the narrative from what we're used to seeing in the media around Indigenous peoples in Thunder Bay, this is the start of shifting that narrative to an annual contribution that's in the billions. And when we think of the impact of the pandemic, the support that the Indigenous spend or impact has had on stabilizing some industries and businesses from going under. So I think, there's an important message into that, and, more opportunity that we can do to co-benefit from the opportunity with the report.
Thanks, Jason. We talk about procurement opportunities, and my mind goes to entrepreneurship and new business development. I will do a shameless plug. We do have a Indigenous business startup program at the CDC. It's called Minikanan Badakadoon. So if you are interested in starting a business, talk to somebody in a blue shirt or jacket. But Brian, this is the space that you operate in as well. What trends do you see in Indigenous entrepreneurship over the next 5 years? And how are we going to support that?
Okay, a couple of things. First one, I'd like to point out that one of the reasons why we participated in the study was because we wanted to see a benchmark and what can we compare to 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So this is an excellent benchmark. It's before COVID. I'm sure the numbers would be a lot different today if we were to upward numbers if we were to do one today. So that's the first thing. The second thing is right now we're looking at most of our loans are in the retail, transportation, mining sector. We need to do more in that area, and I see more proposals coming forward in that area, but we still do not have the capital. Their preference is to come to the Indigenous financial institution like ours, and they do try to go through banks, and that's fine, but because of our value propositions, such as, for example, the grant program that we commingle with the loans, we lower the effective interest rate. So we also provide advisory services before and after, which is good, and we provide them with webinars and other support tools that are necessary for their growth. So it's a very close relationship we try to build with our entrepreneurs, and that has to continue. And even if it's as simple as bookkeeping that they lack certain skills in, we try to do our best to be available through other sources that we can provide to them. And we see more development in that area, particularly as we begin the Ring of Fire development, the road development, and other types of developments happening in the city itself.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to steal a couple of minutes to see if there's any questions from the audience for any of our panelists. Just want to introduce yourself and then pose the question.
Sure, Harold Wilson. And the question is, you talked about opportunities, you talked about challenges. Can you say, from your perspective, from your experience, what's the most important lever right now to unlock some of the capacity for building up Indigenous, I think supply and service especially, but there's all kinds of challenges and opportunities that are out there. What's the most important lever right now to build capacity?
Who wants to take the question?
In our situation, the most important lever that we've noticed is in their plans. What's so important is their capacity to deliver, meaning that they have the ability to follow through with the objectives in their business plan. If you don't have the ability to do that, then the revenue doesn't generate for your business. So that taking advantage of those professionals that are available, that are willing to help, that is a lever that is important to us, and we provide that training, particularly at our Indigenous financial institution. The other lever, of course, is capital, access to capital. Without that, then it's very difficult to take advantage of your objectives in your business plan. So those are two that are important to us, but also realizing, and I should say a third one, is to make sure that the problem that you're wanting to resolve, that you have a clear indication of how you intend to address that problem through your product or service. Without that clarity, then it just makes it very difficult to do anything with your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, you want to add?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the capital side of things. When we always see the comments around, money not being an issue if there's a good market and a plan related to sustainability of the business. we still see challenges there around, again, procurement, and, Jason may comment on that, or he's brought it up in our ABP board meetings, quite a bit, is, there's programs and processes in place that are making it harder for Indigenous businesses to scale and grow. And for us at the ABPA, we focus on that inclusion aspect, but also the growth and the opportunity aspect quite a bit on the advocacy front related to those procurement systems. It's a capital issue with keeping Indigenous businesses set at levels related to capital where they're not able to maximize and scale those opportunities. And it's the procurement systems that are also have to take some responsibility and accountability for having processes to open up their opportunities for more Indigenous businesses to be a part of those multi-year agreements, that they're not set at the same rate if that Indigenous business has an opportunity to grow. So those are some of the main issues that we see, and some of the levers should be some of those procurement teams that are opening up those discussions from a corporate reporting perspective to be held more accountable, and we're hoping to be more independent to verify that within the ABP over the next few years.
Sure.
Just to add to what Brian and Jason said, I think that our partners, in the spirit of true reconciliation that we keep talking about, I think our partners need to look at the Indigenous companies they're hiring and acknowledge that the company you're hiring is an Indigenous business. Often there are Indigenous set-asides, and mainstream companies will come in and meet a few requirements, and I guess cooperate or participate as an Indigenous company. So I think our partners need to really vet who they're hiring, and are they truly Indigenous as they're taking an Indigenous set-aside.
Okay, we're gonna go to the next question here, final question.
Thank you. And just to answer our comment on Harold's question, the lever is to, I think, ultimately do something. Not just talk, but do. Again, thanks, Mike, for the report, and thanks, to our team for doing this. We've been dealing with this stigma that, and we hear it, I hear it, and it's hurtful as an Indigenous person. You don't pay taxes to the city. What do you contribute to the city of Thunder Bay? There's proof right there, right? We're not non-tax paying people that just take. We give. And that's evident, and thank you very much for that. My question to the group and to the team is around, what do we hope to see that will come from this report? What type of conversation that we want to see, right? Because that's what partnership's about. We're working together, not one person benefiting and the other person getting crumbs, right? So, if we can answer that question, or what do we hope to see from this report?
Maybe I can start on this one. I hope that we're going to continue the conversation about the positive impact that we've heard today. And at the CDC, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about this a lot more.
Good question. So as a research exercise, it wasn't, our point wasn't making recommendations, but we also came across around, I think it's there are enabling mechanisms, allowing this Indigenous prosperity to flourish. I think expanding on these enabling mechanisms and enabling frameworks, and some of the advocacy work that your group has done, making them aware around that. But sometimes we can be victims of our own success, because I was a sole proprietor, like I was a freelancer for several years. But the larger the project, the larger the undertaking, the more sophistication you need, the more conceptual sophistication you need, the more sophisticated advisory service you need. And that's part of the scale up. So managing more complex projects, more complex processes is part of the scaling of an Indigenous businesses. like you come to a point, yeah, okay, I did this, this, and this, but some of your hiring employees are taking on larger contracts, there's more requirements, there's more insurance requirements, safety requirements, security clearance requirements for major undertakings. And that's the natural progression of Indigenous growth. And I think, to answer Harold's question too, that's one of the capacity developments is the higher up. There's a lot of startup support, but it's, you know, I talked to Brian, I think a couple months ago, they were having coffee about business expansion. For me, I was talking about acquisitions. You know, I'm getting pushed out in BC and Calgary. I said, is there money for acquisition? Can I do acquisitions? A firm, it's a lot faster for me to go out there just to buy out a company than to grow a company. And he goes, he's already thinking about that. So it's the next level up, Harold, that where the real work, do you have almost a compounding effect, because as all you guys know, in the business people here, the successful ones, your first $1 million is the hardest, right? Come on, I want to hear you millionaires out there not. You know, the first million is always the hardest, but once you hit that, you got capital to deploy. That's when the leverage comes in. You guys know this, and it's, you know, you talk about it with each other, but that's a very factual statement. You got capital, and you can deploy in whatever enterprise, in expansions, new enterprises, etc. That's how it works in the world of commerce. So I'll leave it as that.
Really quickly, if one more person has a comment, and then we have to wrap it up because we're getting the hook here.
Well, for us, of course, we want to see how we progress over the years when we're looking at this study, the purpose of the study. We want to measure our success, and we do know that there's a lot of businesses for sale or about to be sold in the area of Thunder Bay through succession planning and so forth. So we know that. We want to participate in that. We want to acquire those businesses. We want to make sure that the entrepreneurs have the capital to buy these businesses. So that's key. And not only in this city, but other parts of the Northern Ontario. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation. The report will be available if anybody's interested. If you want to talk to any of the panel members or the CDC team, we're here all day. You do have a break now. It's not quite as long as it was supposed to be. The next session starts at 11:15. It's Unlocking Future Opportunities, Building Tomorrow's Projects right here in the Scandia. So thank you very much for listening to our session.